Coming up today, with the general election under 3 weeks away, the official candidate registration period begins. Some big names leave the ruling party, but the main opposition's chief vows to stay on. Japanese media reports that President Park Geun-hye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will hold a rare bilateral summit in Washington next week. Plus, the two suicide bombers who carried out deadly attacks in Brussels this week have been identified as brothers with criminal records. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, March 24th here in Seoul. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, a two-day candidate registration period begins today for the men and women running in next month's general election. The internal politics and strategy of candidate selection has proved difficult for all the parties over the past few weeks, with some political heavy hitters frozen out or left to fend for themselves. Shin Se-min starts us off.
Wrapping up the candidate nomination period, the ruling Saenuri Party lost more lawmakers. 4 members of the ruling camp, including former floor leader Yoo Sung-min and lawmaker Yoon Sang-hyun, left the party after failing to receive nominations. Yoo announced his defection just an hour before the nomination period ended and said he will run as an independent candidate. The party's leadership and nomination committee's failure to decide his position gave him no option but to leave the party. He was an ally of President Park Geun-hye until he criticized her policies last year, leading to a rift between the two. A key member of the pro-President Park faction, Yoon Sang-hyun, also announced his run as an independent. In a recently leaked phone call, Yoon, a former special political advisor to President Park, was heard using profanity while criticizing Saenuri Party chairman Kim Moo-sung. Over on the opposition side, after threatening to leave the party following a conflict over the camp's nomination process, the interim chief of the main opposition, Minju Party of Korea, said he will stay put and focus on winning the election. At a press conference on Wednesday, Kim Jong-un also accepted the party's request that he retain his number 2 spot on the list of candidates for proportional representative seats. The announcement came 3 days after he had boycotted all party affairs following an uproar in the party over speculation he had put himself on the list, giving himself a much better chance of retaining a seat in the National Assembly. Regardless of whether the parties are able to resolve their internal disputes or not, the nomination process came to an end as of Wednesday, and all prospective candidates begin registering their bids with the National Election Commissions on Thursday. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The leaders of South Korea and Japan could meet for rare bilateral summit talks in the next week or so. President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe haven't met since the countries reached a landmark settlement late last year on resolving Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Kwon Swa reports.
The leaders of South Korea and Japan could soon hold their first bilateral meeting since last year's landmark agreement on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Japan's Asahi Shimbun newspaper reported Wednesday President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe are working to arrange a meeting on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit that kicks off in Washington at the end of this month. South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwade has not confirmed the report. But if the summit does occur, follow-up measures on the implementation of the so-called Comfort Women deal are expected to top the agenda. President Park and her Japanese counterpart held their first bilateral meeting in November last year, where they had vowed to fast-track their discussions on Japan's wartime sex slavery issue, leading to an agreement on December 28th. On Tuesday, the first working-level talks follow-up plans took place in Tokyo, with a focus on the creation of a foundation through which the Japanese government will compensate the victims. According to a government official Wednesday, related ministries and experts are involved in discussions, but there doesn't seem to be a blueprint yet. There is no time for much delay, though, considering that only 44 victims are alive today. Another concern is that doubts of Japan's sincerity towards the matter keep arising, including speculations regarding the removal of a statue located in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul and which symbolizes the comfort women. 88-year-old Lee Yong-soo, one of the surviving victims, said Wednesday, "Just the thought of removing the statue breaks her heart and makes her angry." Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Authorities in Belgium have revealed that the suicide bombers in the horrific terror attacks in Brussels were from the same immediate family. Another suspect caught on surveillance camera is thought to still be at large. Kim Mil-gyun with the details.
It has been found that two of the suicide bombers who carried out the latest bombings at Brussels airport and the city metro were brothers. The federal prosecutor said Brahim El-Bakraoui was part of the attack at Zaventem airport, while his brother Khalid struck at the Malbec metro. Together, the attacks killed 31 people.
The suicide bomber has been identified by his fingerprints. It was Khalid El-Bakraoui, the brother of Ibrahim, and born in Brussels on January 12, 1989, and of Belgian nationality.
The brothers were known to have had connections to Salah Abdeslam, who helped carry out the bloody siege in Paris last November and who was captured last week by Belgian authorities. Earlier Wednesday, there were reports that another man suspected of being the bomb maker behind the attacks had been arrested, but the reports were later retracted. The attacks put many countries on high alert, and the South Korean government has beefed up security measures at the country's main gateway, Incheon International Airport. The measures strengthened airport surveillance and mobilized around 700 security officers, including bomb disposal and special counterterrorism units.
We tightened up airport security by deploying additional resources, including the explosive ordnance disposal team and special guards after the Belgium attacks. In particular, we strengthened landside security inspection.
Since the November terrorist attacks in Paris, Incheon Airport has maintained its security level at the third highest out of 5 levels. Seoul's foreign ministry said as of Wednesday, no Korean citizens were injured in the attacks in Brussels. Kim Mil-gyun, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, US President Barack Obama has vowed to aggressively go after the Islamic State militant group in the wake of the terror attacks in Brussels. Speaking after a meeting with his Argentine counterpart in Buenos Aires, Obama described the attacks on an airport and subway station in the Belgian capital as senseless, vicious violence, adding that the world must be united against terrorism. In his first extended reaction to the attacks that killed at least 34 people, Obama said the US will continue to offer any assistance and bring the attackers to justice. US Secretary of State John Kerry will travel to Brussels on Friday to express condolences for the loss of life in the terrorist attacks and meet with Belgian and EU officials. Now, on a related note, the Brussels airport will be closed until at least Saturday. Officials say it will have to remain closed while investigators continue their forensic investigations. Travellers with scheduled flights are being encouraged to contact their airlines for further instructions. South Korea has condemned North Korea for its incessant slandering of President Park Geun-hye. The latest threat against the president is being viewed as Pyongyang's protest against tough, new UN sanctions and the ongoing Seoul-Washington combined military drills. Connie Kim with the details.
A, quote, retaliatory battle of justice to eliminate President Park Geun-hye's supporters was a message on Wednesday from North Korea's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the Fatherland, which also warned that South Korea and the U.S. face a miserable end. The message issued on Wednesday is an apparent protest against a South Korean Air Force drill this week that simulated an attack on a key North Korean facility. Ratcheting up the rhetoric against the South, the committee also said the warfare could start inside or nearby the presidential office of Cheongwade. It added its multiple rocket launchers are ready to target the presidential office at any moment. Seoul's Unification Ministry called on North Korea to stop making these base and vulgar terror threats and warned it would counter future provocations.
If North Korea carries out any kind of provocation, the South Korean military will punish Pyongyang sternly and ruthlessly. North Korea will be fully responsible for its provocations.
North Korea usually makes verbal threats during the annual South Korea-U.S. military exercises. But the severity of this year's reaction is raising tensions on the peninsula to new heights, especially with the new UN sanctions recently imposed on the regime. North Korea has launched 15 short and mid-range missiles since its long-range ballistic missile launch in February. In another move that adds to the North's missile technology, online news site Washington Free Beacon reports that North Korea conducted a ground test of its new KN-11 submarine-launched ballistic missile at the Sinpo shipyard located on the country's east coast. The ejection test conducted on March 16th is the latest since North Korea said it successfully tested a SLBM in December. North Korea is expected to keep up its rhetoric until the military drills are over as a form of protest and as a way to consolidate the regime. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, Korea confirmed its first case of the Zika virus this week, but the country really feeling the heat is Brazil. The number of confirmed microcephaly cases in newborns there has topped 900 in the space of just 5 months. Out of those cases, 122 were positive for the Zika virus. Brazil's health ministry is still investigating 4,300 suspected cases, with roughly a third traced to a state in the country's northeast. The least cases are in Sao Paulo, which has a better public health system despite the dense population. The ministry says Zika infections have been reported in 22 out of Brazil's 27 states. It warned that cases of microcephaly, where babies are born with abnormally small heads, may spread quickly. The World Health Organization has forecast that cases of Zika-associated microcephaly in Brazil will exceed 2,500. Now, in the second part of our mini-series of reports on Korea's fashion industry, we are going to take a look at how those in the industry are finding new ways to build on the unique qualities of K-fashion. Here's Hwang Jie.
This district in southern Seoul, bustling with young Koreans, is now one of the city's most popular tourist attractions. A major reason for that is the street fashion shops lining the sidewalks of Garosu-gil.
Korean clothes is cheaper than Japan and more fashionable. It's provide us with a reasonable price. So with that reasons, I think it's good for us to go shopping around.
And the so-called street fashion of Korea that incorporates Seoul's overall pop culture driven by Korean celebrities and entertainment content is what many point to as the hotbed of Korean fashion. Chung Gu-ho, director of the ongoing Seoul Fashion Week, says Korean fashion has carved out a niche for itself.
Foreign fashion weeks focus on high-end brands, but Korea's fashion week features clothes with more street and pop culture elements, and that's what foreign buyers and the press are interested in too.
The rising brand value of the capital city of Seoul is also drawing major fashion houses, which have begun to recognize its rise in the world of Asian fashion. Chanel brought its cruise fashion show to Seoul for the first time last year, and French lifestyle brand Maison Kitsune paid tribute to Korea in its 2015 fall-winter collection. Chung also says fashion is part of the culture boom driving the larger Korean wave.
What clothes Seoulites wear and what they eat and the culture of the city in general seem to be garnering interest from around the world these days.
Chung, who's a successful designer himself, adds that to survive in the already saturated industry, local designers need to take advantage of Korea's internet infrastructure.
Focusing only on the local market is no longer working. Designers should think of the global market as a city and find ways to promote their brands and communicate with their customers. These days, they can do it using social media.
He adds this is also a way for them to cut costs in the current economic downturn. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. And we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. The next scheduled one coming up at 12 noon Korea time. So until then, goodbye.